Is 2024 the year to drive results? We tend to try and we run about 8 to 10 of these webinars every year. So keep a lookout for them in the invitations, but we'll also put a link to the next one in the chat function a little later in the webinar. But we tend to pick topics that come from what we've heard in terms of client meetings and from clients over the weeks before we actually sort of design. Accountability and ownership is a webinar topic which actually comes up annually. And it surprises me that we can't, it's something that's pretty hard to fix and that we can't tend to drive it and take it off the agenda. It's always something that we have to be conscious for. And I'm wondering if over the last few years, if perhaps we've taken our eye off the accountability and ownership and driving results and high performance. So that's our kickoff webinar topic for the year. The pandemic is now over. 2 years ago, gone. Work from home or work from anywhere is kind of what we're hearing as standard in employee value propositions, despite the fact that we actually have got some clients who are asking people to come back to the office. But I think that's going to be problematic, but maybe I'm just going out on a limb here. I think that work from anywhere has got to be as part of just any value proposition these days. And with a whole lot of these things that are kind of driving, the focus on accountability just keeps getting stronger. We need people to accept ownership for what it is that they're doing in terms of their work, to be accountable for delivering results, and for whole organizations to drive towards high performance. One of the articles that came out at the end of last year, which I thought was really interesting on this topic, was the Financial Review article about the change in the shift that Atlassian and Canva were making in looking at accountability and performance. It's all very well in the good times, and Atlassian and a lot of those tech cultures have had good times over the years. And they talk about on their website, Atlassian's website, about higher productivity, much better retention rates, improved company performance, all because they have this very positive, authentic culture. However, towards the middle of last year, they completely changed their tune and they started to focus very much more on scrutinizing underperformance in their organizations and changing from a very positive, rewards-driven culture and accountability and recognition to a much more performance management style of culture. So it's interesting that was a shift that was happening last year. So I wonder whether or not we have to flip that around a little bit, because what we've got to get is our people much more accountable and open. And in terms of who's responsible, I guess? We think everyone's responsible. Let me introduce myself, yourself, as your webinar leader today, and we'll work our way through the topic as for the rest of the 45 minutes that we're together. My name's Evelyn Muhlenberg. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Managing Director of Learning Ventures. And for the last 13 years, we've been really working hard on challenging people's thinking in the accountability space, but really in the leadership, learning and organisational development space. I've got Karen who'll be looking after the chat, but I can see the chat as well. If you want to pop any questions in, just go right ahead and we'll just answer them in the flow of the webinar. For housekeeping, we've got a couple of polls that we will get to. By all means, use the chat and introduce yourself if you want to share some information, and we will absolutely be putting a link to a couple of the articles that were in some of the invitations that we sent out, so that you've got all of the information that we used to research the webinar. So topic for the webinar, what everybody that's been to our webinars knows is that each one of our webinars is brought to you by one of our strategic pillars. And today the strategic pillar is that leadership really matters, and it does really matter in terms of accountability and ownership and driving results. Leaders set the tone, but that doesn't mean that everyone or leaders are the only ones responsible. We think everyone is responsible, but here leaders set the tone, and they also set the conversations which drive expectations, which helps people understand what they are accountable for. So that's the strategic pillar that's bringing you this webinar. Is 2024 the year to drive results, with accountability being everyone's business? Accountability is accepting the responsibility for our own actions, and it implies a willingness to be transparent and allow others to actually observe and evaluate our performance and what we do. In any organisation, everyone needs to be responsible for output and accountability. And when we talk to clients and potential clients, this tends to be a continuous pain point. And I'm a little bit shocked that in many organisations, they don't feel that there is sufficient trust in the organisation to even allow for 360-degree feedback. And it's just ridiculous in this day and age that we haven't got more transparent cultures. And I wonder sometimes what's going wrong in our organisations. I guess some of the catalyst for some of this disruption is technology and transformation. And if you listen to any or read any of the reports coming out from Josh Bersin, he's continually talking about the fact that AI is going to completely disrupt the HR practice in the HR field. And I think some machine learning and artificial intelligence is definitely going to take away some of the repetitive tasks, and definitely because of the power of computing now, it can actually do algorithms really quickly, so it's going to help us with data, but it's never going to take away that personal relationship and interface. But it will disrupt our sector with all of this technology coming. I wonder whether or not that's actually driving some of the fear and underperformance in our organisation going. 80% of people in a recent engagement survey tended to associate accountability and driving results with performance management, all in the same sentence. And they saw it like it was punishment. And so if accountability is getting a pretty bad rap, they're not necessarily going to be driving results willingly if they're feeling that it's all in this kind of compliance and management. So like any organizational development tool, we can use accountability and performance or managing people's performance and performance conversations for good, or when they're done poorly, they can be really and deliver quite disappointing and toxic results. So first of all, I'd like to ask you what your current perception is of accountability in your organisation. We've got plenty of people on the platform. So Karen is going to launch our poll at this stage, I think. Yep, there it is. So what's the current, how would you describe the current perception of accountability in your organisation? Is it a little bit negative and is it associated with punishment? Is it pretty neutral and it's not actively emphasized, or it's valued and it's well promoted? So whilst you're completing the poll, I'll just talk you through what the agenda is. There's a couple there. There's nobody that said it's totally negative, but there are some neutrals, and I think we have to actually reframe the value of accountability in driving performance, and we actually have to change language. We're going to talk a little bit today about what could possibly be going wrong and why we've got accountability not necessarily turning our organisations around and driving results. And we do look always at 5 actionable tips at the end. So let's have a look at the results. I'll end the poll and we will share the results. What we've got is about 71% of you are in neutral, which is that accountability isn't necessarily acknowledged as a tool, not necessarily actively emphasized. And then we have about 30% or thereabouts where it's valued, actively promoted, and no doubt is driving the results that it needs to drive. Thank you very much for answering the poll, and it gives us some good data in terms of it being a lot of you are in that neutral area. It's one of the greatest tools we can use in organisations going forward. So let's kick off with how we can reframe that value of accountability. Karen is going to load this article or a link to this article, the Harvard Business Review article, on how you can actually encourage employee accountability. And in that article, it is full of very punishing statistics. 80% of people see accountability as being punishing in their organisation. 82% of managers acknowledge that they have limited or no ability to hold people accountable. Their organisations don't allow that to happen. And I guess that reflects a little bit in some of the poll that we just did for a number of you saying that it was kind of in that neutral space. Here at Learning Ventures, we can actually account or vouch for the fact that performance conversations are quite critical to getting accountability happen, and they have to be open and transparent conversations. We've got a program called Performance Booster, which is these performance conversations, and it has been one of our top sellers or top implemented programs over the years that we've been in existence. It was created in 2013 and been updated regularly. But it also won the ARI Award with an implementation that we did on driving accountability and really trusted performance conversations in the New South Wales SES. If I go back to this particular article, and we can go down the statistics black hole, but I'll just quote a few statistics from the article. This article said that only 14% of employees felt that their performance was managed in a way that actually motivated them. And as we talk to organisations, I feel that that's probably still the case, that those check-in conversations now that are part of the operating rhythm of organisations aren't necessarily about people. They're often about tasks, and those check-in conversations are not necessarily motivating to people. 26% of people quoted that they only got feedback once a year. So we might be doing monthly check-in conversations about tasks, but it's not necessarily regular feedback. Only 21% of people say that they've got any control over their metrics and outputs, that it's all out of their control. And 70% of employees feel that their managers are not objectively evaluating them. And it could be all doom and gloom, but they're pretty critical statistics to show that the processes that we're using for driving accountability and high performance in organisations are not delivering what we need it to deliver. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are some things we can do. I think we really have to start looking at the positive impact of accountability on driving individual growth and development, which ultimately will drive higher performance in organisations. There was one more statistic that was in that paper, and it said that 69% of employees did not feel that they were living up to their potential. And herein lies, I think, a huge opportunity. It's a little bit sad that, close to 70% of people feel that they're not able to live up to their full potential in organisations. But it is a huge opportunity for us to actually reframe conversation about accountability and ownership and performance into something that's much more about individual strengths, growth and development. We're working at the moment with a global hospitality group, and they have just defined their leadership capabilities that are going to take them over the next 5 years. And so, yes, a number of organisations have got capability frameworks, and sometimes capability frameworks can be a bit more compliance related. But it's interesting that the implementation of our clients' capability framework is going to focus in the pilot on two specific aspects. And the first one is about how they recruit talent into the organisation. So obviously they're going to set up processes that help them recruit into the new capabilities. But the second part of their pilot is going to be on individual development plans, and it's not going to be brought into their performance process for at least 12 months. So they're going to use those new capabilities for the next 5 years strategic plan to drive individual growth And I think in reframing the conversation on individual growth, we can start to develop behaviours in organisations which will start to drive higher performance. Growth and development are huge motivators, and most employee engagement surveys say that they're one of the key reasons which drive retention strategies. That if we look at the what people say about the organisation, what will cause them to stay and what will cause them to strive, it's about growth and development in those second two aspects. We have to start also emphasising the role of accountability across the organisation. And I think that's also a reframing conversation. It's that accountability is about trust and collaboration in teams. Accountability exists on a continuum from command and control, and there are still many organisations that perpetuate leadership styles that are command and control, which have been outdated for 20 years, but they're still in organisations and still in cultures in globally. In the world, that it goes from that command and control all the way through to agile and self-managed and self-directed teams. So they're kind of the continuum of accountability. So you've got full empowerment at one side and you've got less empowerment at the other. Giving all team members and employees a sense of what's their purpose at work is critical to success in getting it across the organisation. What do the goals and expectations of the organisation cascade down to the team, then cascade down to the individual? And when we can get that accountability or the purpose of the organisation down to a team level, you start to build much more collaborative focus on what the goals and the results of the organisation are. The same is true for the whole team. They don't want to be letting their team members down. And so often what we do is we cascade these goals down, but we don't necessarily cascade them collectively and openly to whole teams. And when we do to whole teams, they work much more collaboratively to drive not only the accountability of the team, but to drive results for the whole organisation. So as I said, it's also a reframing of language to a bit more collaborative, lead to foster trust, and ultimately that drives delivery of the organisation. The last thing that I think we can do in terms of reframing the conversation is about looking at it across the whole culture. And Karen has just loaded this particular paper, which is about empowering your culture with accountability. So we're not only looking at the organisation from a purpose perspective to the team, to the individual. What we're doing is empowering the whole culture with accountability. And a great example and number here of empowerment across the whole organisation for accountability is the Ritz-Carlton famous 2000 number, which is according to this or 2000 rule. And according to this rule, every employee at the hotel is allowed to spend up to US $2,000 to rescue a guest experience without actually having to ask their manager. Importantly, the employees can spend this amount per incident. It's not over a whole year or anything. It's actually per incident. It's a huge number. But for Ritz-Carlton, they've done the return on investment and they've said to themselves, okay, well, if we're going to give people the empowerment to spend this to recover a guest experience, and for a lot of us in that customer space, we know that actually recovery can sometimes retain clients, customers and guests at that end. If we have really positive recovery of a guest incident, we can actually return much greater percentage the loyalty of that customer. But what Ritz-Carlton does is they actually empower their individuals and they say, I'm not going to just give them the $2,000. We have to train them really effectively to make the decisions and how to communicate with the customers, how they're doing it, and to create those really powerful recovery guest moments. Ritz-Carlton has also worked out that the average lifetime value of any one of their loyal customers is about $250,000. So the $2,000 doesn't actually seem a lot in the scheme of things. However, what they've also realised is that guest recoveries have actually been fairly minimal, and people don't overspend. So they've actually found it really effective in their organisation. Now, the lifetime value of a customer at Ritz-Carlton might be $250,000. It's not the same in other hotel chains, and we work with a large hospitality group where the number is 200, and it's actually much more the equivalent of one night stay. But they still have empowered people at that front line across the whole organisation to be accountable for part of that guest experience and part of delivering the results for the organisation. And this is the other successful thing. Yes, we have to reframe the language and make it much more about growth and development, and that's exactly what Ritz-Carlton and our other hospitality group have done. Then we empower the team and make it much more a collaborative result about getting results for the organisation. And here we're empowering the whole culture to believe in driving results, and that's that accountability going forward. I've got another example of a client we work with, Rolig, and what they did was use what they called the Rolig player mindset to drive accountability across the whole organisation. So they didn't use a number like 2,000 or 200 or anything like that. What they did is they drove behaviours, and they had the whole organisation crowdsource and create the 5 key clusters of behaviours that were going to drive what was a really heavy target that their German parent company had put on them. And they'd said, Australia, you're going to have to deliver double-digit growth in your results. And so Rolig asked their organisation, how are we going to do that? And they came up with what was called the Rolig player mindset, and they drove that for that 12-month period, and they actually delivered the results. And it was about making everybody in the organisation that one team, which is that collaborative culture across the whole organisation. They all knew what was important. They knew what they had to deliver. They had very clear and transparent goals and expectations. People were all driving to succeed. They had the tools and resources to be able to do that. They were going to overcome challenges in terms of moving beyond barriers, and that accountability. Everyone had ownership for delivering their part of the aligned results. And that culture is brilliant. It was a great case study of something else that can drive accountability across a culture. So I've got another poll here that we're going to load, which is, what is the biggest challenge your organisation faces in cultivating accountability? And thank you, Karen, for loading up that poll. Have a shot at it. Is it, a lack of clarity in those expectations and goals? It is the blame culture, maybe, communication and feedback, or is it perhaps limited access to learning? What is the biggest challenge that you're facing? I'll let you answer the poll when I introduce what could possibly be going wrong in organisation, and obviously these 4 are part of it. But I was reading an article a week or so ago in HR Magazine, which actually was talking about that culture of blame. And not only were they saying that bureaucracy and management processes were getting in the way, but they were also, in fact, in a lot of ways blaming HR for some of that blame culture and fear of failure. And that is because HR was putting in all of these bureaucratic processes in organisations that were quite prescriptive and actually drove exactly the wrong things that we were wanting them to drive. And I thought that it was actually a little bit harsh. What they were talking about in there was that we, as HR people, were not treating people as adults, and that we were treating them as children, thereby developing passive and almost compliant workforces. Interesting perspective. I think it was a bit harsh, but a perspective for everyone. So let's end the poll and see what the results are, and I will share them with you. It's actually, we're all across the board in that we're talking about a real even percentage, that some of you don't have clarity in terms of goals and expectations. Some of you do have that blame culture, perhaps insufficient communications and limited resources. So it's across the board what your challenges are. So thank you for answering that poll, and let's have a look at perhaps some of the ways we can counter that. That lack of clarity and expectations, this is really in a lot of organisations. And as you can see, I've used a pit crew there, because if that pit crew didn't know and understand what each and every one of their role was and how it contributed to the end, there would be no way they could turn around 4 wheels in 9 seconds or whatever it is that they do. It's interesting that a lot of the research, and there's a lady by the name of Anne Lower, and she speaks mostly on the future of work, but she has actually done some research that was printed in Forbes recently, which said that 93% of employees do not understand what their organisation is trying to accomplish. And one of the ways that she was looking at that is because we're changing our strategies so often in the last 5 years. And I guess that's the nature of change. But we're changing our strategies from, pre-pandemic, we might have been in growth. It was a boom time then. Then there was the pandemic and we had to change our strategy. Then coming out of the pandemic, we've had a downturn and money and capital have been tight. And in fact, I actually even saw in the paper this morning that a number of organisations are doing downsizing again. So things might still be tight. Other organisations that I know are currently moving into growth and are turning. All of these sort of changes are making it unclear what is expected of us in organisations. And the other thing that's driving it is that the pace of change is so rapid that a job description, which might have been relevant 2 or 3 years ago, and I don't know any organisation that changes their job description. Well, job descriptions are a thing of the past. But that aside, if you've still got job descriptions, if you've got them, people don't change them annually, and they should be changed annually. That it's retrospective, a job description, because the world has already moved on. So look, in the absence of job descriptions, how we can add clarity is we can go, why are we doing this? What are the tasks, the 2 or 3 tasks that are going to deliver the results that we need? What do you really have to focus on? And the third thing is, how are you going to do it? What are the behaviours? And that Rollick Player mindset played a really huge role in driving some of the behaviours forward. So this lack of clarity and expectations is really driving some poor outcomes. Blame culture. Oh gosh, I've been working on a project for the last 6 months, and last week I spent a full week with that particular client. Fairly hierarchical, as I said, that command and control still lasts in organisations. And what we're trying to do is actually, they're an organisation, a retail group that is looking to grow quite dramatically. And as a result of trying to grow quite dramatically, we're working on their organisational design. And we had all of the heads of department in the room to talk about what sort of a structure would be useful, or what sort of processes we had to improve to make their org design able to suit an organisation that was going to grow or double in the next 2 to 3 years. Those heads of department spent a good 30 to 60 minutes before we could refocus them on blaming everything. And it was bizarre to see. They were talking very much about, it's a family company and the family has to make the decisions. I can't make any decisions. Oh, we haven't spent any money on technology. I've heard everything. There was everything that they could blame it on and nothing to do with any of them in terms of how they could do it. And it was really hard to shift them or shift that focus on what we could do. Now, I think we did turn them around, but it's that kind of culture which is quite acidic and toxic in trying to get people to be accountable and drive for results, because they're all going, not my fault, somebody else's. So we've got to try and turn that around and really shift so that we can get people that are not fearing retribution and that they're actually owning what they can deliver. That communication feedback can also be quite toxic. I think feedback channels, there was that number I mentioned earlier of people who only received, feedback, say, once a year, or felt they only received feedback. I think some organisations still have that lack of trust, which makes feedback very difficult to be open, transparent, and that psych safety that we need, psychological safety, to be able to give that. But equally, what comes in here is insufficient communications, and that's two-way communications. And I think that the culture that we are in at the moment And that is a culture where we spend quite a lot of digitally doing personal broadcasting has actually changed some of our language. We personal broadcast rather than have solid two-way trusting feedback conversations. So that's also something that we're going to have to look at as one of the challenges, because we've got to be able to work in organisations that have psych safety. In terms of our limited access to learning resources and tools, I think we had a few people that actually said that that was one of the issues. And when we, if we look at that Ritz-Carlton example of the 2000 they were spending, they can't give people 2,000 discretionary money to spend if they don't train them how to deliver memorable moments, how to recover, what to recover, and what's commensurate with the level of the challenge or the failure that's been there. And this is learning, this is resources. We can't have people accountable for what and own what they do if they don't have the skills and the capabilities. And interesting, in that client I was with last week, we were talking quite a lot about the skills and resources for the next 5 years to grow and double the size of the company. And they wondered whether or not their organisation actually had the capability to do it. So I thought that was at least a valuable conversation, because what we were talking really about is, okay, well, we'd switched it around. We can now grow. How are we going to put in the resources and the learning so that everybody could be performing at their best? We've looked at what's going wrong. We've looked at how we've got to reframe the language around this. What are our top tips? I got a bit creative here in putting those top tips together. But a key thing here in driving accountability is that we need everyone to be responsible. As I said, leaders set the tone, but we actually need everybody to be involved here. And this is our last article, which is about the company culture is everyone's responsibility. And I really, really like that they talk about the fact that it comes from the board, but the board, then the CEO, senior management, HR, corporate services, middle managers, team leaders, to everybody has to take it seriously. We can't have our quiet quitters in organisation, or there are a whole lot of words that become part of the lexicon, but we need people to actually be responsible, and we need to treat people as adults going through and own the results. So our 5 tips, let's look at them one at a time. So first of all, in line with that expectation, or setting clear expectations for the organisation, I think we actually can get quite creative here and set some really bold expectations for people. In a disruptive landscape where we actually want people to continuously go above and beyond, these incremental goals really isn't going to motivate anyone. That's just same old, same old. Nobody wants to be ordinary. Nobody wants to be compliant. Nobody really wants to be average. Oh, God, you're average. No, in a performance review, have you ever been put as average? You feel really disappointed. So I think we do have to be bold in what tasks we set people and what targets we can set people. And the old adage of stretch targets, I don't think these are stretch targets. I don't want to call them stretch, because it shouldn't be a stretch on top. It should be a bold goal that we're all working towards. Bold also needs to be crystal clear. Clarity in expectations is really important. Individuals need to understand how it fits into the broader goal and how it aligns, but also real clarity, and an expectations conversation has to include not just, oh, here's the target, but what do you really mean by that? What are you expecting? What does success look like? What do you want it to look like at the end? And if we really clarify what those expectations are of the organisation on us, then we have a much better shot at delivering it. And we can also have some agency about saying, okay, well, I think I can do these things, but I will need some development in that area if you want me to holistically look at delivering it. Times are disruptive, and it really is, I guess, a fine line in setting bold expectations and capitalising on people's strengths to be able to deliver it, because they need to have the skills to go there. If we're going to have cultures that are good at feedback and trust and have that elasticity in those collaborative teams so that they can work really effectively together, and that elasticity that allows for diverse thought, then we have to have fearless authenticity. We've got to build the psychological safety in organizations for people to be comfortable, to fearlessly step up, to empower their employees as leaders, not to be afraid that they're going to lose power, but to give people the power to make decisions and to do the work that we want them to do. And that includes open communications, active listening. It's been around for a long time that listening is a skill that we're actually not taught in schools, and yet it's a critical corporate skill to listen to your people and really understand what it is that they're giving you in terms of information, feedback, and to develop those cultures of trust and authenticity. Bit of Tom Cruise never hurts anyone in terms of mavericks and mavericks at heart. In disruptive organisations, we need to have these trendsetters and these fearless people in our organisations. We're currently working with a client, and earlier this year, we said to the CEO, brand new CEO, that we should ask the organisation, one, what they felt were some of the behaviours that they would need as a company to move forward for the next few years to meet their targets. But two, we said to him, and we should ask for people in the organisation to volunteer for projects. And he said, nobody will volunteer. Nobody will volunteer. We got, I think, 30% of the organisation volunteering to go above and beyond what they were doing to work on some of the projects that were needed to drive that organisation over the next couple of years to transform it. 30% is huge. They're all those mavericks. They're those mavericks as hearts. And you know, they were volunteers. Now, not every volunteer was going to get a role on one of the project teams. They didn't have that many. But they can utilise those volunteers in focus groups. They can utilise. So we've really got to empower these people, and we've got to encourage them to step forward and give them the freedom to be part of the organisation that we want our companies to be. Cross-pollination and collaboration, embrace diversity. And, you know, I won't even get into what is the latest press at the moment or media about the gender pay gap. But we just have to be so much more conscious as organisations that we are really encouraging diversity and cross-pollination of ideas and robust conversations, which will only happen if we've got trust and authenticity, but this unconventional collaboration, which is going to spark the real ideas that build and create much better solutions going forward. We have to create platforms for our employees to exchange ideas, learn from one another, be collaborative, to take on a sense of responsibility and to work together to deliver the results. In this hybrid workplace that we're in, where we have people working from anywhere, working from home, all of those types of different organizational modes of delivery, we actually have to be much more deliberate about this cross-pollination, because traditionally on a platform, when you're working on a platform, it's one way. It's a little like this webinar, which is one to many, but it's also very task focused. And we can, because we're on a platform and it's not as comfortable as a water cooler conversation or a coffee room conversation, and doesn't have some of those social aspects, we tend to be a bit more focused. And that's not necessarily going to deliver that collaboration, which takes time to ruminate and to spark. So we actually, as leaders in organizations, have to be really much more deliberate about how we challenge and get people collaborating in there. And obviously, reward and recognition comes to the fore. Some of the generations, or not some, well, all of the generations that are now coming through are starting to demand and want more recognition and celebration of the success. And it's not just in terms of delivering the results that they do, but also demonstrating the behaviours. We've got to start recognising when people drive innovation, demonstrate ownership and accountability, challenge conventional thinking, come up with great ideas and implement them, become mavericks, challenge thinking, all of those things. We've got to recognize it and reward it. And as we know, that doesn't always have to be a financial pay packet at the end, but recognition. People love to be recognized for things that they do well. And what that does, that role modeling, actually then can be recognized and used to show others what kind of behaviors are really respected around here. It's a very, very powerful message going forward. So in terms of our workshop today, by all means, if you've got any questions, I know I've just sort of usurped most of the airtime, but we've got to actually reframe the value of accountability in not only improving in performance, but in actually driving the kind of results. Because if people are accountable and own their own results, then they're going to drive much higher performance. We can look at the sorts of things that are going wrong in terms of communications and blame cultures and things like that. And we've got to try to shift those around. And yes, that comes from the leader's role modeling, but everybody is responsible for the culture. Culture is everybody's responsibility. And we can look at those 5 tips for delivering accountability in terms of the clearer expectations, cross-collaboration, recognition, and ensuring learning and development, and ensuring that we start to create much more open feedback and communication in organisations that can deliver trust and authenticity as we go forward. Game Changers, that's our white paper series. If you're interested, let us know, and we'll happily send you out our Game Changers, one of which is driving accountability and results, and is a white paper that comes from this particular webinar. And as an organisation, Learning Ventures can help you with organisational design and development, all the way through to leadership development. And we're happy to just chat about a whole range of things. By all means, let us know if you have specific issues, but we're also happy to chat, because what that does is that gives us a lot of information about what's currently happening out there, and I love hearing what different organisations are doing. Thank you very much for joining us today. See you soon.